Well, hey folks, today I'm going to be interacting with a video from worship leader Sean Foyt, and the subject of Christian nationalism comes up.
It's all part of the King coming back. That's what we're practicing for. That's why hell hates it that we're worshiping at every capital across America. That's why we get called, well, you're a Christian nationalist. You want the kingdom to be the government. Yes.
So I'll share something that I really dislike. I really dislike when there's a term being used and none of us know what it means. And Christian nationalism, there's a lot of ways that this happens today. I mean, even down to like the word woke, where we're not sure what this means. And people talk about critical race theory, and we're not talking about the same thing. Christian nationalism has become one of these. And I feel like it's weird because there are a set of people who will take on the title. Not tons, but there are a certain set of people that will say, yes, I'm a Christian nationalist. And even within them, there's there's not this sort of clear definition of what that means. And then there's a lot of people who are accused of being Christian nationalists. And a lot of them are just sort of people on the political right, or they're Christians with conservative beliefs where they're against abortion and they're in favor of traditional marriage or things like that. So what frustrates me about Christian nationalism is I think right now there's a lot of Christians who are very, very scared of this term. I personally have no desire. There's nothing about the term Christian nationalist that I'm like, yeah, I want that. I don't have any interest in that at all. But I also I'm not sure it's a term on its own that we need to be like afraid of or running away from. It depends on what we're talking about here. If somebody's talking about a violent overthrow of the government, obviously, as Christians, we are not for that. But if what we're talking about is a dream or sort of even a goal that the laws reflect Christian values, that the laws reflect godly values, that's something that you're going to have a hard time as a Christian saying, no, I don't want that. So I wanted to pause here just because I want to say, as Christians, I think that we need to make sure we know what we're talking about when Christian nationalism comes up. I'm not interested in any of us adopting that terminology. I don't think it's helpful, but I also don't think that we need to be like deathly afraid of it when people use it.
You want God to come and overtake the government? Yes. You want Christians to be the only ones yes, we do.
Didn't finish that sentence. This is where I'm like, I might be with you. I might not be. I don't know what you're saying. You want just Christians to, yeah, he just doesn't finish the sentence. So the devil's in the details. You got to figure out, what are we talking about here? Are we saying we want laws that are good, godly laws? And this is an odd thing. I think my opinion is that there's a lot of Christians who are thinking very shallowly about this, and here's why. We somehow have got to this point, even with abortion to some degree, where we use the phrase, you shouldn't legislate morality. Every law legislates morality. This is just silly. Even homeowners association laws are enforcing morality in some way. Speed limit laws are obviously laws against theft and violence. But we have to have some basis for things. And so you could say, yeah, but it doesn't have to be Christianity. All right, what is it? Like it's gonna be something. We believe that God has spoken. So the degree to which laws are in conformity to reality as God has presented it is going to be the best situations. So I understand the idea that I think that there are very, very few, if any, Christians calling for an idea of like, we want Christian nationalism, and what we mean by that is that we want everybody to have to bow the knee to Jesus or else we're throwing them in prison. I think that's highly unlikely, or we're going to force people to go to church. But what I think a lot of them probably are saying is we want laws to reflect what God reflects. That would be sort of the most charitable way to say it. So I don't know anything about Sean Foyt, by the way. He may be a guy that I would want nothing to do with. I'm just talking about this on face value. Part of the point that he's making is, why are we running from the idea that we would want the United States to look much more Christian? I would think all of us would want godly Christian leaders. Not to say that you can't have anybody who's not godly in this, but what if there was a point where the American voters decided like, hey, if you're not a believer in Jesus, we're not interested in having you lead us. We certainly do that with our churches. We're certainly saying like, no, we want godly people to lead us. So I once again, this may be a guy that I'm like, I want nothing to do with him. He may have a whole bunch of goofy stuff that I think is bad. I just think we need to stop running from this idea without thinking through the fact that if you're saying no to some of these things, you got to figure out another path that we would look to share common grace with our neighbors through wanting the society to represent reality as God has defined it.
We wouldn't be a disciple of Jesus if we didn't believe that. We want God to be in control of everything. We want believers to be the ones writing the laws. Yes, guilty as charged. I mean, it's funny when I meet Christians where I'm like, I'm like, have you read the Great Commission? Like, this is actually what we want. Guilty.
He has a way of not finishing sentences. And even now that I say that, there's probably going to be a whole bunch of things that I do where I don't finish sentences. There were a couple of times where I was like, okay, what's he going to say? Is he going to be clear on this? And then he just sort of wouldn't finish the sentence, maybe assumed we all knew what he meant. I'm like, I don't know what you mean, dude. Like, you got to finish that sentence. I think when this subject comes up, we've got to be precise in the way that we talk. Maybe he is in other places. He was not precise there. Dude, you got to be precise. You got to say, this is what I mean by this. This is what I don't mean by this. Because it's understandable that people are saying, no, like as believers, we're about the kingdom. He talked about that, but we're about the kingdom. And Jesus used parables with both the mustard seed and with the yeast. And there's other things that seem to point towards this idea also, is that the spread of the gospel is more sort of this grassroots, it infiltrates, and less of a top down. So if somebody was, I hesitate to even use the term again, but if somebody was saying, well, I'm a Christian nationalist, and by that, what I mean is that I want to see the United States more in conformity to exalting Christ. And how I think that happens is by churches just infiltrating the culture with the gospel and winning people to Christ to the point that this is what we're asking for, that we're saying this is what we want. We want godly leaders. We want godly laws. We want to do away with violence. We want to exalt justice. We want, racial reconciliation, and we want an end to abortion and all of those sorts of things. We got to be precise about it. But we also, as believers, what we need to be careful of on the other side is we need to not get into this mode of like, no, we're just sort of over here doing our thing, and we're not trying to have, of course we're trying to have an influence. Of course the gospel is meant to spread and have an influence, especially where there's injustice and there's immorality and there's kids growing up in a very, very confused environment. Of course we want the gospel of Jesus to be the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, that this would be sort of the norm surrounding us. And so that people would have more access to it and not see it as sort of this bizarre thing to the side where there's a bunch of people over here doing something, but that the gospel is taking ground and that people are boldly standing for it. So I'm not interested in the title at all. But I think the ideas that are part of this discussion, we need to do more than just wholesale embrace, wholesale dismiss. We've got to define, and we've got to figure out what we're talking about.